Chapter 11. First Day. Tina was up first in the morning. She knocked her wash basin off the bedside cabinet. It bounced, but made a clangorous ringing sound, waking the whole dormitory. At least it didn't break. Someone must have foreseen such an accident and charmed the bowl. The hangings around the various beds twitched open and heads popped out. Sorry, Tina groaned. It's not time to get up yet. Not for another 20 minutes at least. Lydia swung her legs out of the bed, being careful to disturb Xander as little as possible. He had got up in the middle of the night to go on patrol, but had come back a couple of hours later. He had been cold and damp as he had snuggled back in. As Lydia eased herself past him, he sat up, stretched, and dropped down to the floor with surprisingly loud paws. All the others decided to get up, and they had time for a chat while they dressed before going down to breakfast. In the great hall, they found themselves at the end nearest the professors. There was natural competition to keep away from the top table. The older students tended to win the places furthest from the scrutiny of the teaching staff. The exception to this was that the prefects tended to gravitate closer to the front, usually between the first and second years. They were supposed to spread out amongst the years to keep order, but in reality tended to bunch together, like the year groups. Bryony sat closest to the first-year Ravenclaws, but on the same side as the boys. She told Lydia later that it was so that she could see all the girls and punish the boys if necessary. Lydia grew to like Bryony's dark humour. Professor Flitwick visited their table as the prefects handed out their timetables. He said hello to Lydia and to Tina, who he also knew. That first morning, being a Wednesday, they found they had potions with Professor Verdi, sharing the class with the Hufflepuffs. Lydia was ecstatic. She liked Stefano Verdi, she knew a few things about potioneering, and she would be in a class with her Hufflepuff friends, Teddy and Freddie. Flitwick went on to explain that their year had a smaller intake than normal as a consequence of the Wizarding War. For this reason, they would share all their classes with the first years from another house, though not the same house for every class. Most of the other years did not share classes like this, apart from the 6th and 7th years. They were smaller due to people leaving after they had graduated their OWL classes. Flitwick answered a few questions which arose, then left them to their breakfasts. "How do we find the classroom?" Shona asked as they left the great hall. "It's all right," Lydia replied. "I know the way to Verdi's class." The first years all had to go back to their dorms to get their school bags. This was no problem for the Hufflepuffs, as they were on the same level as the dungeons where the potion laboratories were. The Ravenclaws had to go all the way up to their tower, then right back down to the dungeons. Mel Jenner had suggested taking their bags with them to breakfast. As they did not know which classes they would be having that day, they would have had to take all their books. As Mel had started hauling out every course book from her trunk, it had become obvious that the idea was flawed. They had an opportunity to chatter together, some more than others, all the way up and all the way back down again. They were excited as they stood outside the laboratory door, mingling with the Hufflepuffs. "What's your common room like?" Lydia asked Teddy and Freddie. "Secret," Teddy answered. "If I told you, I'd have to obliviate you." "Imagine the comfiest place you can," Freddie enthused. "Then forget all about it, because our basement is 6 million times better than that." "That's a rough guess," Teddy confirmed. "Between 6 and 7 million times." "That's not really a description, is it?" Lydia complained. "Imagine a tree house and a den and hiding under your bed," Freddie suggested. "And a secret garden, and a meadow and a glade and a wood in the spring," Teddy added. "Then just keep imagining, because you'll never see it," Freddie taunted. Lydia only had time to scowl at him before Professor Verdi called, "Enter, enter, one and all." The two sets of first years went into the dimly lit room. They milled around for a while, then settled in groups of 3 or 4 at the workbenches. Lydia, Teddy and Freddie got a bench together. Oddie Anderson seemed to be left without a table to join, so Lydia invited him to join them. Oddie thanked them, without actually looking at them. Freddie mouthed, "He's so shy," at Lydia, and she nodded. Professor Verdi greeted them all warmly. He asked them to introduce themselves, pointing to people seemingly at random. The biggest of the boys was first. He rambled on for a while about where he was from, and what he wanted to learn about in potions, then stopped. "That's it, I suppose," Dean concluded. "Thank you," Verdi said, then pointed out, "It might be helpful if we knew your name as well." "Oh, right," Dean chuckled. Twycross. Dean. Dean Twycross, that is, not Twycross Dean. That would be crazy. Well, I don't suppose it's really crazy, but it isn't that. It's Dean Twycross." "Thank you, Mr. Twycross," Professor Verdi said with a raised eyebrow. "It is good that we have all morning, I think. Miss Ward, you I already know, but could you introduce yourself to the class with your name and one sentence about yourself, please?" Lydia grinned. "Hi, everyone. My name's Lydia Ward, and I'm Muggle-born." "Brava, Miss Ward," Verdi smiled. "You set a standard for us all, so I will follow. Hello, I am Stefano Verdi, and I am not a vampire, whatever certain prefects may tell you." They carried on around the class until all were introduced. Verdi gave a speech about the importance of potions and careful potioneering. He told them some of the history of potion making. They had a short break where a few went to the bathroom and the rest stayed and chatted. After the break, Verdi introduced them to various pieces of equipment they would be likely to use that year. He showed them the cupboard where they could store their cauldrons so that they didn't have to carry them to and from each potion class. He showed them the storeroom where ingredients were kept. As lunchtime approached, he brought the proceedings to a close with the threat of homework. "Your next potions class is Monday afternoon, so I shall set you some homework." This was met by the inevitable groaning from the class. Verdi smiled. "It is this. We shall talk about ingredients. Please read through the chapter on common ingredients. If you are Ravenclaw, try not to come up with too many questions for me. If you are Hufflepuff, try not to fall asleep before the end of the chapter." This was met with more good-natured groaning as the class dispersed. They returned to the Great Hall for lunch, keeping their bags with them. After lunch, all the boys apart from Oddie had to go back to the dorm to get their Defence Against the Dark Arts course books. Oddie and the girls had had the foresight to collect the whole day's books at breakfast. There was plenty of time before classes started again, so they went out to sit in the balmy September sunshine. "It's getting hazy," Oddie notified them. "That's a shame." Lydia frowned. He was looking at his book again, so she asked, "Why is it a shame, Oddie?" "If it means it's going to be cloudy tonight, then our astronomy class will be cancelled," he informed her. "What's wrong with a class being cancelled?" Mel asked. "Especially one that starts at 10:30 and means we won't be in bed before midnight." Oddie glanced at her and then looked down again. "Sometimes I wonder if all of us are Ravenclaws. A missed class is a missed opportunity to learn. That is why we're here, you know." Mel laughed. "It's all right, Oddie. We won't tell the other boys you said that." "Thanks," he mumbled, returning to his book. The boys joined them on the grass, followed by Teddy Lupin. "Hi, Lydia," Teddy said, standing nearby. Lydia shuffled to one side. "Hi, Teddy. Come and join us." Teddy sat down on the grass in the gap Lydia had made for him. "This is Teddy Lupin, everyone," she announced to the group. "His godfather is Harry Potter, and he's a metamorph magus." Teddy went into what was becoming a routine of showing off his metamorphic abilities. All the members of the group were impressed, apart from Oddie, who was reading. As the lunch break ended, they gathered up their books and set off to their next class. "Where are you next?" Teddy asked Lydia. "We've got Defence Against the Dark Arts with Draco and the Gryffindors." "Lucky you," he growled. "We've got defence as well, with the Slytherins." "Oh, lovely," Lydia commiserated. "Who's your professor?" "Professor Twinborough. Do you know her?" Lydia pursed her lips. I haven't met her, but Draco has mentioned her. I think he said she's an ex-Aura, so she should know her subject. Oh, cool. Teddy's face brightened. What's happened to Freddie? Lydia asked. He went back to our common room with a couple of the girls. They're probably braiding each other's hair. Lydia gave him a playful punch on the arm. Don't you be cheeky about our Freddie. Teddy laughed. See you later. Have fun. Lydia headed off to catch up with her classmates. Shona had trailed behind to talk to her. He's nice. Teddy, that is, she observed. Yeah, I think so, Lydia confessed. The defence class was upstairs on the second floor. Draco caught Lydia up on the stairs, on his way from his office in the dungeons. Good morning, Miss Ward, he greeted her. Hi, Professor Malfoy, she responded. How's your first day at Hogwarts going? He asked the group of Ravenclaw girls. There was a unanimously positive reply. Good, he grinned. We'll soon put an end to that. With that, he sped off ahead of them, mounting 2 steps at a time. Draco made it to the classroom ahead of all the students. He stood by and held the door open as they entered, greeting each group. Once they were all inside and finding where they wanted to sit, he moved to the teacher's table, which was raised up at one end of the classroom. He stood beside the table until they settled, then he sat down on one corner of it. Good afternoon, Gryffindors and Ravenclaws, he addressed them. My name is Professor Malfoy. I am a friend of Harry Potter. He paused for a few seconds while a shiver of whispers went around the class. As some of you may know, I was not always a friend of Harry's. I was brought up in a family steeped in the dark arts. It was a family who practiced the dark arts, and I'm ashamed to say, who served the Dark Lord himself, Voldemort. My own father is currently in Azkaban prison for dealing in the dark arts. He looked down and nodded to himself for a moment. These classes are designed to help you defend yourself against these dark arts, from the outside but also from within. The professor stood and began to pace from side to side across the raised stage on which his table stood. You see, dark magic and dark objects have an appeal. If you have problems, if you have anger or fear, it can be tempting to try these dark arts, to deal with your problems. Some might try them to punish the people they feel are causing their problems. But it is a lie. The dark arts don't help, because the real darkness is in the person, the user. A rock is not evil, but someone hitting you on the head with the rock is. He paused while the class giggled and whispered. These arts are about power, and they become dark when that power is abused by people, succumbing to the darkness inside them. Certain items, powers, actions, become associated with dark intentions, and become known as the dark arts. The distinction isn't always clear. Draco walked back to the corner of the table where he had started, and sat on it again, leaning towards the class. Let's take the example of love potions. These are not what we class as part of the dark arts, but think about it. If you use a love potion to help someone get around, say, their shyness towards a friend of yours, you could argue that you're doing them a favour. Once the potion wears off, they might find they really do get on well together. On the other hand, if you use it to take control of someone and make them do things they wouldn't want to do, you are enslaving and abusing them. Same potion, very different intentions. And a harmless prank becomes something dark, evil, and also illegal, in fact. He stood up and looked at them for a moment. So in these defense classes, I hope to teach you about how to recognize dark arts, cursed objects, and dangerous creatures. I will show you how to protect yourselves against them. I also hope to teach you how to avoid getting involved in anything which could be seen to be dark, to recognize the temptations and the signs. You will learn a lot at Hogwarts, much of which will give you power, that only we happy few hold. You owe it to yourselves and everyone around you to use that power wisely, not selfishly. We have seen in recent years what happens when wizards and witches do not use their power responsibly. Let us begin. Draco spent the rest of the class on some of the basics of self-defense and the situations in which it might be helpful to cast shield charms. He promised that their next lesson would involve practicing the necessary wand work and actually casting the charm. Please don't tell Professors Tully or Flitwick that I'm teaching you charms, he joked as the class packed to leave. Lydia had an odd uneasiness and stayed behind to talk to Draco as the others were filing out. Professor Malfoy, she said as she approached him, can I ask you something? Of course, Miss Ward. She looked around and waited until the last of the students had wandered away. What's that talk you gave at the start? About me in some way? She asked, making eye contact. Draco examined her gaze and began to smile. It is exactly what and why I try to teach in these classes, so it applies to everyone. But you are very perceptive. As I started talking about it, I realized it probably applies more to you than anyone else. These different abilities of yours will present you with many new challenges. But don't forget that I will always be here to try to help you. You're aware that I've had to face and fight the darkness in myself. Lydia nodded. Well, Draco continued, I'm sure that you, simply through growing up, will have to face and fight your own challenges. I'll be here to help. You have only to ask. Thanks, Professor, Lydia smiled. Then she sighed. Draco raised an eyebrow. What's your next lesson? You'll have to hurry. Free period, Lydia grinned. Astronomy at 10:30 tonight with Slytherin. Ah, yes, the first years are Wednesday this year. I have a feeling you won't be stargazing tonight. The clouds are rolling in. He nodded towards the window. What will happen? Lydia frowned. Will it be cancelled? Draco grinned. Professor Sinistra could ask you to turn up so she can give you a theory lesson. But my guess is that she'll cancel. Astronomers love to mope when it's cloudy. You'll find out officially when you get back to your common room. Now, if I'd known you had a free night, I'd have set you some homework. Too late, and you didn't hear it from me, Lydia grinned. Off you go, then, said Draco with a wry smile, then held up a finger. Oh, and before you go, we should set up a time to meet, every week at least. I'm usually at home afternoons and early evenings at the weekend, so maybe a weekday evening? Tuesday evenings? Lydia suggested. Draco nodded. After dinner would be best, if that's okay. I tend to have detentions or tutorials before dinner. That's great, Lydia confirmed. Down in your office? Best place, Draco smiled. See you then, or, of course, any time you need to see me before then. Lydia nodded and waved to him as she left the classroom. When Lydia arrived back in Ravenclaw Tower, she knew immediately that their astronomy class had been cancelled. The delighted expressions of all her classmates, other than Oddie, were unmistakable. She went up the stairs to the dorm to drop off her school bag. Shona and Mel were coming out of the dormitory as she opened the door to go in. Have you heard? Astronomy's off for tonight, Shona informed her. Yeah, I sort of guessed from all the laughing and cheering downstairs, Lydia told her. The prefects are getting razzed because of all the people trying to revise. What are you going to do now? Mel asked. Lydia shifted her school bag on her shoulder. I thought I'd do Verdi's reading and make some notes. Shona frowned. Why? You've got until Monday. You could have all tonight free. Lydia shrugged. Or I could do it now and have the rest of tonight free. Don't want to end up doing it Sunday night, and we don't know how much other homework we're going to get. You're not just trying to impress Stefano, then? Mel grinned. Lydia half laughed, half frowned. Why would he be impressed? All he's going to know is whether people did it or not. He won't know or care when they did it. Anyway, Stefano's a friend of my uncle." By this time, Lydia had migrated to her trunk and was putting away her books, keeping her copy of Magical Drafts and Potions, and some parchment. "I thought you said your uncle was a muggle," Mel asked. "How does he know Verdi?" "Yeah, he's a muggle, but ever since I turned out to be magical, he's been the one who's got involved with it all, looking after my interests. I think Mum's still a bit freaked out, but Uncle Ambrose takes everything in his stride. And he helped Harry with a case, so Harry's been really good, helping him get ready for Hogwarts and everything. And Uncle Ambrose just seems to make friends. He's like best mates with Flitwick and so on. I suppose it helps that he looks more like an old warlock than a muggle." Shona was intrigued. What did he do to help Harry Potter? Lydia was worried she might make too much up to remember it all. "I'm not sure. It was something about some ex-Death Eaters doing something, and some muggles might find out about the magical community. It prevented a breach of the Statute of Secrecy, I suppose." This seemed to satisfy her friends. "My dad can't handle the magic stuff," Shona confessed. "It's really embarrassing to him. Like I've done something shameful. Mum's just all, 'Oh, you're magical now, are you? Have fun and try not to get your clothes too dirty.'" They giggled at this. Lydia managed to break away and go down to the common room. She found it easiest to do her homework sitting next to some 7th years, who were revising and would not suffer any noise nearby. Once she had finished, she took the opportunity to have a look at the many books in the bookcases and shelves around the common room. She came across Oddie doing much the same, except he was opening and sniffing the books, rather than reading their titles as she was. After a while, the rest of the Ravenclaw students swarmed in, having finished their classes for the day. Most people chatted for a while until it was time to get ready for tea time, or dinner time, or even supper time, depending on where in the country you had been raised. She saw Teddy on their way into the Great Hall. He was with Freddie again, and they stopped for a short chat before heading off to their separate house tables.